Hari Om Tat Sat. Welcome to Chit Chat, y'all, where our motto is get your chit together. Chit means enlightened awareness, and we're about examining the impositions on said awareness and strategies we can take to remove those impositions so that we can heal ourselves and heal our world. With me, of course, is Kishore Chandra, and today we have an interesting topic. I think whatever we talk about is interesting. I think we're interesting. The interesting topic we want to get to today, well, we've titled it as Killing Sprees, Gun Control, and the Obsession with Gore. And this is following a shooting. Well, last week we talked about a shooting that happened the week before, where that kind of sprung this whole Stop Asian Hate thing into the social psyche. And a short time after that, there was another shooting spree where I guess 9 people got killed. Let's get a little bit of information about that. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know all the details because it just seems like there's so many shooting sprees. I can't keep up with all of them at this point. And so, but this one has been propelled into the social conversation. So maybe you have a little bit more information around that. So you want to just open it up with that, give us a little bit of an update on what's going on with that, Kishore?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because last week we spoke about a shooting and we went into various different topics around race, and we talked about that because the shooter was white and 6 or 7 of the victims were Asian, and so there was a lot of like the Stop Asian Hate, this kind of thing. And in this shooting, we kind of have like a 180, where the shooter is now of a Muslim background and he is anti-Trump, which is really interesting because we're kind of seeing like now just the both sides going at it with each other. And I mean, like, I was sharing this with you just now, Jaya. It's really interesting because it's almost like, yes, the shootings of course matter and the lives of all these people matter, but at the same time, I feel like the United States is becoming so desensitized to this kind of violence or to this kind of mass shooting. And that's why I really like that in the title was included, you came up with the title with Obsession with Gore. And I'll just say one thing. I remember when I was a kid and I went to go watch like a PG-13 movie. And like when I was a kid, which was like what? I'm 32 right now. So like, let's say 10 years ago, I was 22. Let's say 20 years ago. So 20, oh my God. Wait, is that right? Okay, so 20 years ago, I was 12 or 13, like a teenager, right? So like 18 years ago, something like that. I remember going to the movies, PG-13 was like a kiss or like something, or like maybe someone got shot, but like that was it. You saw them get shot and then boom, they died or whatever. Now you go to PG-13 movies and the sex is out of control. and the gore, I was explaining, because I was sharing this title with my partner, and English is not his first language. And he's like, "What's gore?" And I was like, "Gore is like bloody, just like, when you go see those movies and it's just like you see all the blood, you see all the injuries,
Kill Bill, like Quentin Tarantino for that matter.
Yeah, like that kind of stuff. And so like now you go see movies like Kill Bill was rated R, but you go see movies like these Avengers movies or, like, I don't know, like these kinds of things, like the gore is there, like shooting off people's body parts and this and whatever, and like all this stuff. And it's become so normalized that in a way, I feel like we're kind of stuck in a place, this is just my opinion, of being so desensitized to violence that like no one knows how to stop it. Like we're so caught in this vicious cycle that even though the one side is saying, gun control and this, and the other side is saying, no, we need our guns and this and etc. But now we have such an interesting point where it's like, well, one week it was the white versus the Asians, and now this week it's the anti-Trump, and now next week it's going to be that, and next week it's going to be this. So it can't really be said from a logical standpoint that it's like only this side. No, it's a human condition that we become obsessed with these really like dark sides of our nature, and then it's very hard to stop, like a kid in a candy shop.
From my understanding in the old world that we hear about in scripture, the two things that they are kind of I want to put the lid on in the strongest way is sex and violence. These two forces, they're like pretty strong with like, in other words, if you read scriptures in terms of the injunctions, that because scriptures have many elements to it, there's like an injunctive aspect to scriptures. There's like a storytelling aspect that's meant to give you like some morals or some inspiration. So there are like different aspects to scriptures. And one aspect is like, you know, injunctive, like you must do this. And when you look at these scriptural injunctions, a lot of them relate to keeping the lid tight on sex and violence. And I think when it comes to violence, people could at least theoretically appreciate that. I think, of course, when it comes to sex, people, when I say people, I mean postmodern people would have a lot harder time with that for obvious reasons. But I think the reason, this is an intuition, and I could probably spend some more time with this, making a more cohesive argument for it. But the reason for this is because sex energy and violent energy share a very intimate relationship that I think the postmodern world is afraid to acknowledge, because that means they would have to acknowledge maybe the value of a more traditional or religious or even, dare I say, conservative approach to sexuality. At least just from a scriptural perspective, we can say that in the Gita, which is a good starting point for us at least, that Krishna speaks about the problem of kama, which is generally translated as lust. It actually just means desire. But let's say, it's connected, sex is connected to that energy. And it says it comes from the creative force of nature. I like to use this language, Rajaguna Samudbhava. So it comes from the creative force of nature. So nature also has the sustaining force, which is called the Sattva-guna, or the mode of goodness, often translated in that way. And then it has a destructive force also, known as Tamaguna. So Krishna says this sex energy is coming from the creative force of nature. And unless it's employed or like informed by or elevated to goodness, like unless it has some function in the service of virtue, then he says it very quickly transforms into destructive energy. And so this is, again, maybe somewhat of an intuitive insight, but there is a relationship between sex and violence, and why the two, at least in the old traditional world, are like, there's like a lot of strong scriptural injunctions against those two. And so the reason I bring this up is to say that there is the rise in violence naturally corresponds to or correlates with the rise in this sort of free sexuality. You know? And that people couldn't have predicted, because, you know, as a language around it goes, it's beautiful. There's nothing about it. It's like almost like there's nothing negative about it. You know, it's only positive. Aside from like maybe child pornography, which is that people are also getting in some like weird wishy-washy territory nowadays. But like the whole like MAPS community, I don't know if you ever heard of this, like MAPS community is out there. Minor attracted person. Let's not even go there right now, but you know, there's a push to even normalize as crazy as that. But most people are still not that damn crazy. And so but so now that aside, other things related to sexuality are like all beautiful. So there's nothing to be like, I hate to say this, like as a person that's part of like the LGBT community, I know when it was like this, I don't even know what this, but I know when there was like a push for like LGBT like marriage laws. You know, and like I from the conservative community, you got like this really strong pushback that it's a slippery slope, and that if you allow that to come sort of like mainstream or central or whatever, then it's going to slip into all sorts of crazy things. And we were like, no, you know, no, that's just a false argument, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, when you look at some of the things that goes on and the sort of arguments that are given for the sort of, and I'm talking about sexuality right now, you know, it's like, I don't know. It's like the conservatives had a point, you know, and I hate to say that, but it's just like an honest recognition of what's going on. Anyway, the point that I'm really trying to make here is that's not going to be touching anyone's buttons, is that there is a correlation with the rise of human sexual expression in the public spaces or in mainstream culture and the rise of violence, because these two actually share a pretty intimate relationship. This is not a fully constructed argument, but from the Gita, sex energy, if not used specifically in the service of virtue, quickly turns into destructive energy. That's what Krishna is warning us in the Bhagavad Gita. And so I don't know if, anyway, so that's just one point. Maybe I'll stop there, but it's one point that I didn't even premeditate. It literally just came up as in the course of me speaking, but I think it's an important reality to maybe recognize that these two actually, there's a correlation there. And so you can't exactly get one without the other. And so we have to look at how violent our culture is becoming, and frankly, how desensitized we are to it. We may also be forced to look at the whole realm of sexuality that has become just like matter of fact in mainstream. I mean, just your example of what PG-13 was when we were growing up versus what PG-13 is now is just a good example of that. I don't know what you're hearing with that. I mean, I said something sensitive also, but.
No, I think every point that you brought up is so interesting, and we could unpack it for hours. For hours, there's so many different points to speak about, because obviously there's a correlation between sex and violence, and it's like a very fine line. And we're somehow we're going down this direction, but it's good. I think we can keep it not too intense. There's a very fine line between sex being used as a constructive creative force and sex being used as a destructive force, and like when you look back on any society that or civilization that decided to conquer another civilization, like the first thing that they did was like rape people, like they would just like get the women like and kill the men, that's like the first thing that was done. And so it is a really like interesting aspect of humanity that obviously can be used in good ways for creative forces in Krishna's service. However, regulated. However, like it's also one of the strongest, greatest forces there is. Right. So obviously there has to be a lot of regulation around it. There has to be a lot of open conversation about it and this kind of stuff. So, many people suffer from not being able to just like speak about these kinds of things. Yeah, I remember last week we were speaking about about the shooter in Atlanta who had some sort of sex addiction. Right. He had some sort of sex addiction, or like maybe he was visiting the massage parlors or something like that, or etc. And there are something I'm going to bring up for me, it's an interesting point in like how we gloss over things, or we create a facade around things to make it seem like the problem has gone away. Right. But it hasn't gone away. And the physical example that I'll give is I still have like childhood memories of what Times Square used to be like. Right. And Times Square used to be like peep shows, all the peep show stores, and like prostitutes all around. And it was like not a great place to go. And not only Times Square, but other like parts of Manhattan that were like more downtown, like the Village and this kind of stuff. And there was this mayor whose name was Rudy Giuliani. Mm-hmm. And he like quote unquote cleaned up New York, and a lot of it was just like a kind of like a blank slate, just like let's put a beautiful sparkling lens over everything and turn it into like Disneyland. And so now you go to Times Square and you don't really, maybe there's like one or two like remnants of that old Times Square, but it's very just like capitalism, big stores, like happy, joy. Right. And I think that that's such a missed opportunity in a sense of looking at your problems directly in the face and being like, we as a society have a problem with sex, or like I have a problem with like this, and instead, not only because like when the society does it, then we will also do it, oh, it's not a problem. Oh, I don't have a sex addiction. Oh, whatever. And, not like we said last week, anyone that was listening, it might sound like we're we're in support, or like we're being, what's that word, apologists or something like that.
Right.
But it's really interesting to think that a lot of these people who are the shooters, like they're very unwell, you know, they're very mentally unwell, you know. I was reading about the shooter in the Colorado, and apparently he was like suffering from paranoia, suffering from anxiety. That's a whole nother issue about mental health, you know.
Right.
And mental health is another one of those, I mean, I feel like sex is somewhere in mental health as well. It's another one of it's another one of those things that are just like glossed over, or there's a facade, or we don't want to talk about it. And then it's really interesting because then when things like this happen, when things like these shootings happen, we're not talking about sexual addiction. We're not talking about mental health problems. We're not talking about any of those underlying issues.
Gun control.
We're talking about gun control. We're talking about racism. We're talking about all of this stuff, which is like, yeah, maybe there's a little bit of that in it too. Like maybe he was a racist. Maybe he was sexualizing Asian women or whatever. Or maybe this guy was like whatever, you know. But at the core of the issue is like a deep mental, you know, unwellness, whether it's a sex addiction, whether it's anxiety and paranoia due to the crazy society. I mean, like, who's not anxious and paranoid these days? Like,
I just came back to New York just this morning into the city, and I kid you not, I'm just like freaking out. You know, like the birds when they're like eating the food and they're like nervous. I'm just like for no reason, I'm just walking the street, and out of nowhere, I'm just like, you know, what's going on? I'm like, why have I gotten so paranoid all of a sudden?
Oh, Krishna. Yeah. So it's like I mean, we live in Kali Yuga.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it is unfortunate that the things that get highlighted when these sorts of events take place are the things that are like they're like super unique to like a particular community or something, that the more human problem that comes up is just glossed over. Like the more human issue that underpins the event is just literally glossed over or not considered whatsoever in favor of something that's like kind of almost like niche, or like, you know, like, I don't know why this image is coming in my head, but like a PhD, you know, where you're like learning something so specific that it's not going to be applicable or meaningful for like the general mass of people. So you're like, so similarly, you have an event that you're putting into the general psyche of the masses, but then you choose to focus on, it's like so particular that it doesn't deal with the more universal human problem that's underpinning it. And so, you know, we favor the discussion on race, or you favor something else, like gun control, even that sort of discussion. But you don't favor the sexual deviancy that maybe was, led to this particular shootout. You don't deal with the mental health problem. Why is everyone such strong mental health problem? Is it related to broken families? Let's talk about the broken family issue and how that's impacting mental health, for example. And so, yeah, it gets like these events get, especially nowadays with our society being so radicalized, I feel like every event gets simply co-opted to push your own political agenda instead of dealing with the more human issues that give insight. And that is unfortunate, and it doesn't bode well for the future of our societies whatsoever. But coming back to the violence point, so there's this correlation between sex and violence, and we don't want it to this conversation to be hijacked by the sex part. You know, going back to the violence part, in the desensitization.
Desensitization. Oh my God, that was a good one.
For those of you guys who don't know, on CHIT Chat, there are a lot of novel words that come up. They've been added to the dictionary after appearing on this show. So desensitization is one of the new words here. So due to that, becoming increasingly desensitized because of our indulgence in violence and gore, our psyches have been. It feels like sometimes like irrevocably transformed by the ingesting or indulgence in our super gory stories, our super gory music, our super gory video games. I'm not gonna even lie. There was a short period when it wasn't that short, but there was this period where when I was in North Carolina, where while taking, oh my God, I don't know if I want to say this. Anyway, while taking lunch, I used to like take a little relaxed time, decompress time. I like this word decompress because whenever you're about to do some like wanton sense gratification, I need to decompress, which means basically do some folly. I somehow got into looking at, oh my God, I don't even know when I admit this.
Oh my God, Krishna, it can't be that bad.
Terrible, it's just like embarrassing. Anyway, I got into looking at like videos of people playing Mortal Kombat. So Mortal Kombat was a video that
That's like next level. It's like meta.
You laugh, it makes me more embarrassed.
Oh,
but I grew up with this video game, Mortal Kombat, and which was like kind of violent even for our era, but it wasn't like super gory. It was just kind of like violent, like you hit the person and like there was like some really weird, like blood would come out, but it was like, it wasn't super.
It was gory.
It wasn't
Scorpion. The finish hymns or finish her.
Yeah,
they just like cut off your head.
Yeah, the fatalities were there, so it was kind of like, it was gory. Okay, it was gory. But so I lived in the place where I was living. Everyone there played video games, so I guess I got in my psyche, and I kind of just got attracted again at looking at Mortal Kombat videos. So I was looking at some of these videos, and they're so gory, like I mean, like unbelievably gory, and of course all the women characters, of course, are like hypersexualized. I'm like, how are they warriors and like this sexy? You know, that's a sidebar thing, but hypersexualized, like, you know, lady warriors, and then just like super duper gore. But it was something that was seductive about watching it, where I was like, I would, you know, yeah, I'm going to decompress right now, and I'm going to take lunch and watch something like this. It was something very seductive, and I think it relates to the mind's attraction to the weird, and its attraction to that which is like not status quo. You know, I mean, they have that sort of stuff you can never experience. It would never be like really accepted in the status quo, and yet somehow, because it's, you know, it's enveloped in this whole fantasy, it becomes possible. Well, this is just a video game, right? This is just a video game. This is just a movie. And so it's fantasy. Everyone knows it's not real. And so because it's not real, combine that with our attraction to that which is weird and not status quo and gory, and you get us indulging repeatedly in a world, however fantastic it is, fantastic meaning of a fantasy. And by doing so, we create our minds. We try to create a world in our mind that becomes sort of solidified with every vision or every indulgence in such a thing. Because even like in a real sense, we say, okay, we're watching a movie, that's a fantasy, right? We all know it's a fantasy. But the things that we think up in our head, they're as insubstantial most of the time as the things that we're watching on TV. They're like, how many memes have we seen where it's like, you know, I wake up at 3 a.m. to think of fake scenarios. You know? So many memes like that, right? So the world that's going on in our mind is often like a fantasy, but that fantasy has real impact. Just like, oh my God, why am I going to say this? But there was this one meme, I don't know if I sent it to you, but it's so funny. The meme was, you may create this world where you have like a crush on someone. That happens sometimes. You like crush on some influencer or someone in your life, and you're crushing on them. And then you put a story up, and your crush didn't see your story. This was the meme. And then it said at the top, when your crush doesn't see your story. And it was this influencer, I think her name is Trisha or something. She was like, oh, I'm devastated. I'm so unhappy. And as funny as this meme was, it got me really thinking we create these fantasy worlds in our mind that actually have real impact on our practical life. It's not that it doesn't have real impact. And so we indulge this fantasy world that's extremely gory. And the belief is that it won't really have impact on our real life activities, even though it's transforming our mental world in a particular way. And so, yeah, this is like the folly of the postmodern world. We think that our indulgence in these fake stories don't have consequences. Last thing I'll say here, I want to give you this chance to respond to this. But in the Yoga Sutra, so the Yoga Sutra, when Patanjali begins speaking about the yamas and niyamas, so one of the, is it niyamas? Is satya, right? Truth.
Yeah, niyamas.
So one of the niyamas is satya. And so I was looking at the commentaries for satya, and it says that for a yogi who is practicing satya, he will not indulge in make-believe stories. Because that would be against the principle of satya. And that kind of like blew my mind, you know, not indulge in make-believe stories, because that would be against the principle of truthfulness. And of course, as we move further and further away from truthfulness into make-believe, thinking that there is no consequence, we see that actually there is real consequence. It actually is a real sort of activity.
I love everything you just said, and especially this point of how the things that are going on in our head, they will create circumstances for us, you know? And so like what we're intaking from the TV, what we're intaking from the movies, like that is going to affect us, you know? It's going to make us violent. It's going to make us savage. It's going to make us this. It's going to make us, etc. And I think what's really interesting about that too is that it's like, I feel like there's an idiom for this, but I have no idea what it is. But it's almost like everything is fine and dandy if it's like in your head, or if you're just like watching a movie or like whatever. But then once you take action, obviously that's irrevocable, right? You can't go back from like physically hurting someone. You can't go back from like physically killing someone, or like even saying, you know, things to people. It's very hard to come back from that kind of stuff. However, I feel like we don't look at the trajectory of like what got the person there in the first place. And I feel like a lot of us think that like we are totally incapable of doing that. You know, like we're totally incapable of what's it called? Of being evil, or of being this, or oh my God, how could he kill these people? And something really interesting that I was talking about with a friend is that in a lot of studies, like, and this is like common knowledge in psychological studies, that a lot of the times people who are abused, as you know, physically abused or sexually abused as children, a lot of the times they become abusers, right? Like the abused becomes the abuser. And it's and I mean, like in Kali Yuga, I would say everyone is abused, you know, like in some way or another, whether it's physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, everyone's abused. And to think that that abuse, whether it's from our parents, whether it's from people in our school, whether it's from society, bullies, whatever it might be, to think that like that isn't being like absorbed into our psyche is so foolish, you know? And to think that like we can't snap at any moment, like this is Kali Yuga, you know, like people snap all the time, you know. You brought up New York City, and New York City is one of those places where people become desensitized to people snapping. You know, it's like you're walking on the street on a Friday night, you're just chilling with your AirPods in, like walking around, and all of a sudden it's like, boom, there's a fight, you know, on the street, and like people are just like going at it, and you're just like, oh, whatever, you know. And like this kind of stuff happens all the time, and I think that we, like, I'm going to bring that point up again. I said at the beginning, there's this facade, or there's this kind of like blanket that we want to put over it. You know, we don't want to look at our own issues, right? Our own demoniac natures. And I'll bring up this point. I was talking to you about this before the chit chat started, because I thought it was really interesting, of just like not wanting to like point the mirror back at ourselves and like take a good look at what's going on with us. And
Right.
that's why I love this chit chat, because in chit chat we're always saying like the point is to get your chit together, our chit together, right? My chit together. And so on Sunday I was reading. I teach Bhagavad Gita on Sundays, just with like a small group of my yoga students, and it's really interesting because they're not like. They're very spiritual, but they're not like devotees. They're not like, practicing bhakti yogis and stuff like this. So we're reading chapter 16, and chapter 16 of Bhagavad Gita is all about the divine and the demoniac qualities. Right. And it gives very beautiful lists of what the qualities are like and etc. But a lot of even before my class started, I told my students, so you will be triggered today. I'm just letting you know that there will be some words like hell and sin and demon and like, these kinds of words. So just, I'm forewarning you. And it was really interesting to see people get triggered by these words, because there's a lot of not wanting like that judgment or like that judgment of God or that judgment of someone above me to tell me what I'm doing is wrong or isn't wrong. And you were bringing up this point earlier about how, for the most part, it's just like, just do whatever you want, just like do whatever you want, watch whatever you want.
Which is, by the way, which is precisely how Krishna defines demonic mentality in that chapter.
Exactly. Yeah, Krishna defines this demoniac mentality as having like a very ungodly, cynical, nihilistic point of view of just like nothing means anything. Everything is produced by sex, desire, and lust. So I might as well just like do whatever I want.
I was specifically thinking also at the end of the chapter where he says, Yashastra vidhim usrigya vartate kamakarataha, that you disregard Shastra Vidhi. So the injunctions, again, this injunctive element, you disregard the injunctive element of sacred texts in favor of what? Kamakarata, do what I want. Do as thou wilt. That's your motto. Then, yeah, he's like, Nasasidam avapnoti nasukam namparam gatim. You'll not be happy. You'll not get any perfection, and you're not attaining supreme destination. And this is not Krishna condemning the individual. He's saying that this is the result of that particular choice, of doing as thou wilt. This is actually what it leads to. So it's just, and that's at least according to Bhaktivedanta Swami, that is this decisive factor of the ungodly mentality, that they don't care for I would say the wisdom, frankly, of the injunctions of sacred texts, and they favor the spirit of do as thou wilt. So just to your point, how is someone else supposed to tell me, because you're a fool, you need to be guided?
No, exactly. And that's what came up with my students of just like, one of the students was like, this feels really triggering because, like, who are we to judge others? And like, like so much has been done in the name of like religions judging and this and etc. and whatever. And I agree with that. I agreed with her, and I explained, kind of in this chapter, also Krishna is speaking about how those in the demoniac nature will make a show of kind of ritualistic religious rituals, right? Like they'll make a show of it for their own benefit. So of course there are people, and we have seen it in society, people benefiting for their own good and not for the good of humanity or for the good of their congregation, right? And they're doing heinous things supposedly in the name of religion. So that's very clear there. But what I got from my students was just like this, and I brought this up to them. I posed it as a question, and they were like, oh yeah, you're right. Of like, why are we so afraid to be judged, by a higher power, by whatever you want to call it, we call Krishna, the universe, God.
Even let's take it down a little bit, just by like a healthy, dignified standard of things.
Yes, a healthy, dignified. Well, that's the thing. It's almost even hard to say that.
Right.
Say something like that, a healthy, dignified standard. People, well, what's a healthy, dignified? Who decides what's a healthy? Right. I'm not going to be judged by what your healthy, dignified standard is. Right. And it's like, okay, like how did we get here to this place where it's like, no, your rules don't apply to me and your rules don't apply to this, and I'm going to do whatever I want. And then I think, the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's not a far, march from I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm going to watch whatever I want. I'm going to treat people however the way I want. It's not a far march from there to like anxiety, paranoia, sex addiction, depression, you know, all these kinds of things, which then eventually, hopefully not, but we are obviously seeing this happen in the United States, leads to like physical action, whether that be violence or whatever, you know, shootings, etc. And so it's like, I really love this chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and you know, there's so many, like the yamas and the niyamas and yoga sutras are also speaking about what we shouldn't do, what we should do, and in yoga texts you find a lot of this, what you should do, what's favorable, what's not favorable. And this is such a
this to this very point that you're making. I don't know if this is like there's something diabolical about it. You know how I think. I'm not like a full-blown tinfoil hat wearing guy, but I definitely like lean in that direction. But it's that the way that we've been indoctrinated to think about religion is, and when I say religion, I mean specifically the injunctive element of religion, the part where it says this is the standard, this is what you got to do, or you'll be judged. That part, the way we've been socialized to think about that in a largely secular world is that it's an imposition on life instead of a protection of life so that you can flourish. You know, and I don't know how exactly the old world, and when I say the old world, I mean the old Vedic world, because I know that old Middle Eastern tradition world is a little wild. And I'm gonna just leave that at that. But at least the old Vedic world, I don't know exactly how they indoctrinated their populace. But I know for me as a practitioner, and coming from, you know, a liberal Western upbringing, like we all did, and having to encounter like this strong injunctive element of sacred text, which is always triggering if you're coming from a liberal Western upbringing. Having to like reframe it, at least in my mind, and I generally tend to think that this is also the case in truth for sacred text, but before I could understand the truth of it, I had to reframe it in my mind that the injunctive part of sacred text is not an imposition on life. It's how I'm processing it because of my training or upbringing. It's actually a protection of life. And as you start to see, just like, you know, I guess my mind goes to my mom whooping my ass growing up, you know, sorry. But, you know, in the beginning, I've talked about this several times on Chit Chat. And like in retrospect, I mean, my love for my mother never diminished, even when I was being chastised in that way growing up. And it increased as I got older because I saw her strong impositions, what felt like an imposition when I was a young child, I came to discover was a protection. And I came to discover it was a protection even at a very young age, because when I got to high school, a lot of my friends that didn't have that strong parental figure in their life, they were allowed to just do as thou wilt. They were allowed to do what they want. And I saw how the quality of their life was being disintegrated because of being able to have that level of freedom combined with that level of folly, you know, foolishness inside. And so even at like a young teenage age, when I was seeing this happen to many of my friends, actually, I came to really respect my mother's strong iron fist, so to speak, more and more and more. But it's interesting that as a young person, what felt like an imposition, when I was coming into some maturity, felt like a protection. I was actually protected so that I was able to thrive. So I think in the same way, when it comes to the injunctive statements of sacred text, because people are like spiritual babies, dude, like cry babies. They crying, oh, I can't have that. I can't do this. I can't do that. So because of our like profound level of immaturity as spiritual entities, you know, most people are not very spiritual. They're just like sense gratifiers. And when you're a sense gratifier, your whole concept is that unless it produces pleasure, bad, like a very childlike individual, bad feeling, bad, good feeling, good, like a monk, like an animal, you know, just basically on the animal platform. So because of that level of immaturity due to indulgence and sensuality, you will always hear the injunctions of sacred text as an imposition, because they do make impositions on that aimless sort of capricious pleasure principle. They do like injunctions, but those injunctions are for protecting life, not for making impositions on your life. And so Yeah, I just hearing your students, how you're describing your students, and just reflecting on my own experience with about the injunctions when I first came into my spirituality. This is like, yeah, okay, I had to reframe it. Scripture is not trying to impose on my life; they're trying to protect my life. I only came to really appreciate. That was my mental adjustment. I couldn't really. I still was uncomfortable, but that's how I mentally adjusted. But as I explored my own spirituality and came into, my own spiritual, how you say, stableness, and I came to appreciate that. Wow, these are actually giving me a lot of protection. Able to flourish in ways I would have otherwise never been able to flourish because of the senses not having that. What I thought she was an imposition. Like, no, this is a boundary, bro. Don't cross it. And this is injunction. Do not cross this line. And it's like kind of like hearing an injunction, like, don't put your hand in fire. And you're like, who are you to tell me I'm my own individual? I'm my own. I do. Okay, do it. And then you put your head in fire and it gets severely burned. So instead of working within those boundaries and flourishing, you just perish. Yay.
I'm just thinking of like these video, I don't know what they're called. I don't know if they're memes, if they're videos, but like maybe these like TikToks or like reels or whatever of some girl being like, God, please show me if there's a sign, if this guy is bad for me. And God is like, he's bad for you. She's like, not, and she's like not listening. She's like, God, he doesn't, he's already cheated on me once, and he's already like, done this, but I really love him. Can you? But he's like, you don't hear me? Like, he's bad for you. It's like, God, he's done all these awful things, but I just love him, and I know he can change. And then like God throws like a toaster from the sky at her head, and she's like, and then and it's like that's how we are, and it's like we don't want to follow. There's that drive to be sense enjoyers, like there's that drive to it feels good. I love this comment that Madhava Puri made. We act like animals much of the time, and the belief that we can be more than that has to be cultivated. How much of what I call pleasure is no different than the pleasure my dog enjoys. And it's like, if you really like, bring it down to brass tacks, it's like, it's like food, sex, shelter, like we're just animals. And it's like we have to be
and Rishabh Dev is saying human life is not meant for enjoying the senses like the hogs and dogs that eat stool, but rather it's meant for tapadivyam. And tapadivyam means the divine austerity, which sattvam shuddhyat, which purifies existence and allows you to experience Brahma sokyam tonantam, unlimited spiritual happiness. And then all we get stuck on hearing this is that, wait a minute, divine austerity? No. It's like we just get stuck at that threshold. And how you see my enjoyment is like the dog. My enjoyment is sophisticated, and it kind of gets in sort of this ego.
And it's so interesting because you see that the more sophisticated people's enjoyment get, it just gets more sick. It gets more twisted. It gets more like, whoa, how did we go from here to there? Right. I was just going to say that I remember that when I think a lot of people have had this feeling, like who have lived in ashrams. I remember that when I moved to the ashram, it literally felt like shelter. Like it literally felt like a protection against my heart, a protection against my consciousness. And not because I moved into the ashram and all of a sudden it was like, oh, I don't think about these things anymore. It's like, no, because I'm in an environment now where everyone around me is trying their best to protect their minds from this kind of degrading stuff that we know, we're reading it, we've had lived experience. We know this stuff is going to bring us down, and it's like when you're not in that environment, when you're out in the wild country of the city, that is not what people are, preaching on the streets. It's like enjoy all of the marketing, all of the advertisement. It's all just enjoy, and do whatever you have to do to get that enjoyment. I remember when I was reading chapter 16, also one of the qualities is like just putting yourself in front of others, like being extremely selfish and full of greed, and like not having compassion for others, and just doing what you need to do to get ahead, and others don't matter. And it's like when you go to a city like New York, you know, it's like you see that very palpably on the streets. You know, you see how
I saw when I got off the train coming into the city. I was walking in this direction. You know how when you're walking and the two of you are about to collide, so one of you has to like choose a different trajectory so that collision doesn't take place. And it was like very visceral. I'm like walking this way, and then this other girl started walking, and it was clear that our trajectory was gonna meet at a certain point. There would be a crash. So she immediately, after we both kind of registered that that was going to happen, she kind of like became assertive and was like charged through, you know? And I was like, damn, girl. I was like, okay, I mean, I don't mind taking the other trajectory, the other path of God.
Oh, Krishna. But something that I thought was also really interesting is that Krishna says in chapter 16 that even though those who are exhibiting demoniac qualities, that he is still in their heart, you know, right. Krishna is still in the heart of every person. Right. And I think that what is, going back to this point of the shootings and the violence and all this stuff, it's like, we don't understand that the nature of our consequences, is existing inside of every single one of us. Like, we are participating in that, we are as much to blame as anyone else, because we're participating in this senseless, let's watch the violence, let's watch the gore, let's watch the porn, let's watch the stuff. And it gets sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker. And then there's this gall to be like, I'm and it's like, really? I remember
it's so interesting, because I feel like when it comes to like political issues also, like, I don't know, it seems like all of us, we suffer from, I love this statement.
I love this.
Yeah,
it's so, like we're all going through it.
Right. I've noticed this sort of doublethink. I think doublethink is a word you can find in like 1984, which basically means you have like two completely contradictory notions in your head, and they exist there without any cognitive dissonance. So you can like literally go from one extreme to its diametric opposite without thinking that anything is wrong or bewildered about that. And I feel like it's very true, like political conversations also, how like you can like blast someone for being, I'm trying to think of a good example of this, but you can like blast someone for not showing enough compassion, for example. You blast someone for not showing enough compassion, and the people who do that use like all sorts of pejoratives to chastise you. And I'm like, don't you see any doublethink in this? Like, you're not showing me any compassion. Like right now, you're not taking into account where I'm coming from when I say something. Like, what is my life experience that makes me say a particular thing? So like, what do you mean by compassion, whilst saying that we have to show compassion to persons? Like, anyway, so yeah, it's just very fascinating how this is happening on so many levels.
It's very fascinating, and it's also like, we brought this up last week when we were talking about the shootings and catharsis, and like the ancient Greek society, they had this tool to purge society of its ailments, and how now we don't really necessarily have that. And, there's a lot of judgment on both sides and this and et cetera, especially when now the shootings are happening. But one thing that doesn't happen, and I said this last week, but I wanted to repeat it because I think it's a good point, and I have a story about it. One thing that doesn't happen is that we never really, I talked about this with my students in Bhagavad Gita as well, because in Gita, in chapter 16, it's saying like, you might be born into this nature, but you can follow the scriptural injunctions. You can turn away from greed, lust, and anger. Like, it's possible. Mercy and taking shelter of Krishna, right? So that aspect of trying to, Krishna is still inside the soul, the heart of these people, these people who killed. I remember you would bring this up a lot with Trump. It's like, Krishna's in Trump's heart, whether we want to accept, Krishna's inside Trump's heart. And it's like, we are always focusing on the racism or the victim or the oppressed or the this. And I said this last week. Yes, of course we should focus on that. And of course there should be people to help them and rally against them, and they should have their support groups and etc. But what about the people who are so sick that they are doing these things, you know?
Right.
So you look at like those dream countries, like, you know, I don't know, Norway and Finland, like they actually have functioning prisoner rehabilitation programs where it's like you did something wrong, you stole something, you know, you killed someone, whatever it might be. And the goal is to rehabilitate that person, you know, to make them functioning members of society. A lot of spirituality is involved and God and this kind of thing. But in this country, that just doesn't exist. Because once you've crossed the line, which as we've determined through this chit chat, it's a very fine line. It's very easy to cross that line, you know.
Right.
Now you're forgotten and you're disgusting, and we're gonna, you know, you're gonna rot away in prison. And the story I wanted to tell is because, you know, I think that goes hand in hand with our own desensitization. I think that's what.
Oh my God! When people use big words. No, I'm kidding.
It's like I'm like sounding smart, and then all of a sudden. No, I think it goes hand in hand. I think it goes hand in hand with like how we are desensitized, how we let ourselves be desensitized, how society desensitizes us, and then we become jaded to violence, to this, to whatever, or you know. And the story I wanted to tell was, I remember, you know, at the Bhakti Center, when we were living there, around the corner of the Bhakti Center was like a Catholic mission or whatever, and they would serve food to, you know, homeless people or people addicted to drugs living on the streets and whatever. And like any New Yorker, for the most part, I'm generalizing myself, you're just trying to get from point A to point B as fast as you can without like having to deal with that. Unfortunately, you know, like you live in a big city, you get jaded to that kind of stuff, and you're just like, people who look like they're addicted to drugs, walk the other way, you know?
Right.
And I remember it was such a interesting / funny experience for me, because I remember our dear friend Janavi, she was like, we were walking one day and she was like, did you know that like that man who sits in the wheelchair, did you know that like he was a musician and he like traveled here? And I was like, no, I didn't know that. How'd you know that? And she's like, well, you know, I stopped and I spoke to him and I really heard about his life and, you know, all this stuff. And I was like, I was that was really brave of you, you know. But like when I really think about that, you know, like I really think about like, wow, you know, when I think of Janavi, like I'm like, she has so many saintly qualities and she's so wonderful. And it's like, how many of us are willing to sit and listen and hear about that other person, you know, maybe I don't even know that other person, that person who did something wrong, or like something went wrong in their life and their trajectory and they just went, and now they're stuck in darkness. But that doesn't mean that Krishna isn't present in their heart, you know. But as a society, we don't want to be judged for doing what we want to do. But now that someone has shot the person, now that someone has been the abuser, now that whatever, no, I'm pointing the finger at you and it's over. End of conversation. You know, you're a racist. The end, right? Or you're this. The end.
Right.
And it's, yeah, I'm just like thinking about how, even though we have a lot of lofty ideas, like positive, all this, you know, mumbo jumbo on social media, it's like the real idea of rehabilitation, or of seeing that there's a spirit soul inside of that offender, that nice drug addict, you know.
It's such a nice point to think about rehabilitation, not only on like a psychological level, but on a spiritual level.
Yes.
And I guess my mind just goes to like an old religious world where like rehabilitation of the soul is central for the society. And I'm sure that comes with its own host of issues, undoubtedly. But at least like on a metaphysical level, at least theoretically speaking, when you think about where like souls needing to be rehabilitated, it kind of creates a sense of unity amongst humanity, like an appreciation of the fragility of being human, no matter who you are. And therefore, if someone is like had a little slip up and they went crazy, like I probably said this before, but when I was a kid, I couldn't understand how people could become crazy. As an adult, I'm really starting to get it. Like, I'm really starting to get it. And I had this experience in New York last year. it was like springtime. It was raining all day. I was having a really bad day internally. I was feeling sad. And I was walking through Washington Square Park on my way back to the Bhakti Center. And as I was walking through the park, it was like this one moment when I felt particularly sad. And then I was like, oh my God, I can see how I could just like literally slip. So I was like, shake it off, guys, shake it off. Because I just felt like there was like a moment where if I wasn't careful, I was about to cross the threshold of no return. You know? And I've come to appreciate, like, I can really understand now how things could actually go crazy. And seeing the level of sort of like mental instability of our like old people of today, that's become more of a concern, I think, for a lot of people. Like, I just hope I don't go crazy when I get older. And so anyway, coming back to this point of like having as central to the culture, the concept of the rehabilitation of the soul, and that souls are like trapped in bodies, including human bodies. And as such, all are subject to frailty and folly and degradation and loss of dignity and so on. And I'm not unique in that regard. It's not like, oh, I got it together, that couldn't happen to me. It's like, nope, that can happen to anybody. And therefore, with that understanding, having a more empathic or compassionate disposition towards the plight of someone who did unfortunately cross a particular threshold and wasn't able to come back from that, and thus, you know, committed a mistake. I don't know. I feel like in the secular world, because they aren't there's a lot of talk about like humanism and equality and a sense of unity, but I think the metaphysical grounds that they stand on, which are dualistic grounds in nature, doesn't actually allow for a deeper sense of unity amongst, not only amongst humans, but amongst all species and amongst nature itself. Because, I mean, as you can like platitudinously.
I'll let that one pass. That sounded smart.
I'm sure that's a word.
Yeah, platitudinously.
Platitudinous is definitely a word. I don't know about the ly at the end.
I think it is. I'm going to let that one go.
Okay. I told you, we expand the vocabulary here on Chit Chat. So, you looking it up? I can see you.
I am. I'm looking it up. I want to know.
It's a word.
Platitudinous is a word, but it doesn't seem like platitudinous.
I even said that ly. I wasn't sure about that.
Oh no, wait. It is a word.
Okay. Yay.
It is a word.
All right. Like you said, you try to talk smart and then all of a sudden, bam. Okay, so the secular world, the point I'm trying to make is the secular world, they're standing on metaphysical grounds that do not allow for an integrated view of reality. So their view is necessarily fractured and separate and necessarily alienated. And although they may spout various platitudes like equality, you know, justice for all, or whatever the little slogans are today, that's very nice and they're appreciable to some degree on a conventional level. But the metaphysical ground they're standing on actually doesn't allow for an integrated vision of the world. And therefore, there'll always be a sense of me and you, which is basically the problem that Vedanta poses as the root problem in this world, is that the problem of separateness. And so there's, you know, me and you, and there's maybe a God, but he's over there, I'm over here. So this is at the root of our existential or metaphysical dilemma. And so we can't appreciate how like, oh, someone just crossed a threshold that they couldn't return, and that could actually happen to me. And therefore, let me respond with compassion or kindness, maybe not on a personal level, because, you know, we finite souls, we can't like be that for everyone. But at least if you have that as central to the culture, you'll probably have institutions that will manifest to help persons rehabilitate on a psychological level, and more importantly, on a spiritual level. And because of not having such a culture, now we're going to have to suffer the consequences of the fractured metaphysical ground that we're standing on, which keeps always at odds with each other. and really on a like deep level, unable to really empathize with the plight of what it means to be human, as long as you're doing good, right?
Mm.
If I'm doing good, I'm not able to really on a deep level empathize with the plight of humanity in general, what to speak of the plight of a human specifically speaking. That requires crossing a deeper, more expansive space and awareness that our present delimited awareness, that's our opening line. There are a lot of impositions on awareness. And unless we cross beyond those impositions and enter into more expansive ground of subjectivity, then we're going to have to suffer the consequences of our crippled psyche. The word Mahatma comes. There's Mahatma. The word Mahatma means broad-minded. And then there's this contrasted with Duratma, which Prabhupada translated as crippled-minded. And so, yeah, I mean, it's kind of sad. This brings me to this last point I wanted to connect it to. The gun topic, we did put it in there in the title for the reason, this is kind of a joke and kind of not a joke where I'm coming from, but because this problem of self-alienation from an integrated ground of all being, namely, we're all like crippled souls at odds with one another. I think I need a gun. And I say that like partially as a joke and partially like if y'all out here wilding out because we're indulging in sex that's unrestricted. We're indulging in the violence that's concomitant with sexual culture. And we're developing psyches that are desensitized to profound levels of violence and gore because we just keep indulging in that. We're literally in a space where that's very dangerous, actually. And as I was talking to Jai today, he happens to be back here in Bhakti Center too, visiting for a week. And I was like, there's a very thin veil of civility, in modern, postmodern humans. It's like all it takes is a little bit of human desperation and zero training in like austerity and spirituality. And people are going to be wilding out, and it becomes very dangerous. So in that context, although I believe the gun control topic is really a distraction from more fundamental issues that need to be looked at if we're going to have any hope of solving the issue. Until then, I might need a gun. What do you say about all this? Like I said, it's literally about 20% a joke and 80% how I actually do. I'm not gonna go.
I think that there are clear cases of gun control that have worked, but I also think that those cases of gun control that have worked are also, I love this word that you used, thin veils of civility, because I think that those cases of gun control that have worked in countries like, I don't know, maybe Australia, Kavi can tell us if I think Australia and New Zealand and those countries, I think that even though it has worked in a sense, it's a thin veil of civility because it's not like those countries are, demilitarized. Like they still have militaries that are ready to go at the moment. And so it does become scary in a sense because it's like, well, who am I putting my faith in? Am I putting my faith in this country who is militarized and could do whatever they want and my voice doesn't matter or nothing that I do matters? So I do see that point, but I really think, and I also kind of agree and disagree in that the gun control thing is a what's it called, distraction, because I don't think that an AR-15 needs to be owned by a civilian unless we're fighting the government. I mean, unless things go really haywire and the government just goes nuts.
A lot of people think that's the forthcoming future, right?
That's what people think is the forthcoming future. A lot of Americans think that the government is going to fall apart and we're going to go into total dystopia. And you know what? I will say one thing. If we end up in a Mad Max, kind of dystopia, I want a gun in Mad Max dystopia. You know, I don't want to be without a gun in Mad Max dystopia, because if I'm without a gun, I'm gonna get killed or turned into a slave.
I think,
so, you know,
I think this on that. Yes, first of all, yes, and second of all, I think when people hear this sort of thinking, first of all, I would say personally, I've never really actually thought so deeply about the issue until about 2 years ago. There was some shooting that got launched into the public psyche, and everyone was talking about gun control for like a month or 2 months, maybe. It was like, they were like going really hard at one point. And I had really literally no thoughts about it. Like, I didn't really care. I don't own a gun, but I never thought about the issue. And then I was talking to a friend, and he was like being very vocal about no guns. So I decided to play devil's advocate, as I normally do when I hear anyone going too hard on one side. I just like, for my own pleasure, usually playing the devil's advocate. And so I asked him, you know, well, what if someone's like bigger and stronger and faster than you? How are you going to protect yourself? Or let's say like a woman, like suppose all the guys are becoming creeps, absolutely. And you have some creepy guy that's bigger and stronger and faster. Then what is she supposed to do? Karate chop him? Like, it's not going to work, you know? And I said, you know, so guns kind of make sense from that perspective. That wasn't even like a conviction of mine. I was just playing devil's advocate. And he was like, well, if she could get a gun, then that guy can also get a gun too. And I was like, I know, that's the meaning of evening the playing field. He was like, well, you know, if he gets a gun, then what will you do? And I was just like, may the best man win. And then we both had like a little laugh about it. But anyway, so I think when people hear people concerned about like government takeover or Mad Max scenarios, they think like you're living too much in a fantasy world. Like, that's not going to happen. I feel like that's the belief, but just from what we've been talking today, if you're cultivating psyches that are fixed on gore and violence of the most excessive kind, and as we said, the world that you create inside your mind has impact on what you do. It will come out. Then why is it like such a far stretch to see that we could very easily end up in a Mad Max situation? Like, for me, it's not that far of a stretch, frankly speaking.
No.
And we've seen examples of this already, like with Hurricane Katrina, and like there's already been examples like when all the structures.
Hurricane Sandy in New York.
I don't know about the craziness that went on there, but there's examples of this. Like, it's not like so far out to me, even though
that's why
about the subject matter. It's like I see why a person would think like a gun would be important with all these sorts of crazy people who aren't purifying themselves, who aren't rehabilitating themselves. Yeah, it seems like it's a thing. Like, it's not.
Yeah, and I think that again, I just love this phrase, the thin veil of civility. You know, like when that hurricane happened in New York and like the lower half of New York became like completely blacked out, it was Mad Max scenario. You know, people were looting, shooting, this, whatever. People were killed, raped, all of this stuff. And if you didn't have a means to protect yourself, I guess that's that. And I want to read what Kavi wrote, because Kavi's from Australia, and they have a very different. Yeah. So she says, I find it weird being in the U.S. thinking anyone could have a gun on them. I guess the issue in the U.S. is people think if everyone has a gun, you need to have a gun to protect yourself. Makes sense. You're home. I feel very safe in Australia. There's very little petty crimes, home invasions, etc. People would probably use a baseball bat to defend if someone breaks in. But what if you have a baseball bat and they have a saw or a gun?
Oh, yeah.
Well, one thing I will say about that is that I think that Western countries, and I think Australia falls into the category of Western countries. I think in Western countries, there's a lot of like the thin veil of civility. And I think that there's a lot to I don't know if learn is the right word, but just like to put ourselves in their shoes, where like this disbelief of like, I feel very safe in my country, or like, we used to think that we felt safe in the United States. No one has gun here unless they're in a gang. But what if the gang comes to get you? What if you did something to offend the gang unknowingly? Anyway, what I was going to say is that, in quote unquote third world countries, which is now you can wait. Okay, I'm interested in this gun thing.
Copy's got your
yeah, I want this. You can only get registered for a gun if you live in the country and use it to kill kangaroos. Wait a minute, I'm confused. Why are we killing kangaroos? Are kangaroos bad? What did the kangaroos do? Are kangaroos actually evil? I think I've heard this. The kangaroos are actually like really mean. I'm very confused now, Kavi. You need to explain to us
It means like you get a gun for hunting. Well, what if I say I want a gun for hunting, but I'm using to hunt people? Like, anyway.
Wait. But then Kavi said, when I said, well, what if they have a gun, or what if they have a saw? She said, haha, well then you're in trouble. Throw a kitchen knife. Oh, okay. The kangaroos eat crops. Okay. Wait. Okay. Let's bring it back. Let's bring it back from the.
That's so silly.
Let's bring it back from the kangaroos. I think that in countries like the United States or the UK, they're supposedly in the UK, at least to my knowledge, guns are also banned as, like this. So, or Australia where guns are banned. I think a lot of it is a thin, veil of civility. And there's this mood of just like, oh, that could never happen here, or the government would never take over and whatever. And I think what's happening in the United States, it's actually really interesting because it's not like that can't happen in the UK, or that can't happen in France, or that can't happen in Australia, where it's like this unraveling. Wow. This unraveling of society where it's like becoming very, very, very bipartisan. It's becoming very intense, becoming very this. And I'm going to say this, I feel like a lot of Latin American countries, or maybe even African countries, are just sitting there being like, girl, well, welcome, because it's like coup d'etats, government takeovers, militarized governments, all of this like really awful stuff like happens a lot. And I'm not saying that it's a good thing and that it should happen. I'm saying that these are realities that other people these are realities that other people go through, other people go through. Like right now in Chile, there's like really awful things going on, and like people actually need to protect themselves from the government. People actually need to protect themselves, and some people are choosing other measures. And who are we to judge what measures you should take or what measures you shouldn't take to protect yourself against, like, I think it's almost like this.
Even the government is a really big one. And but what about just other desperate humans?
Yeah, well, this is something really interesting. Sarah Grahia is saying in Poland and Finland, to get a gun, you need to pass a psychological test first. Yeah. That's very fascinating.
That's not happening.
That's not happening in the United States. Preeti says, unfortunately, we may be too far gone in the USA for de-armament. Yeah, I agree with that. We probably really do need guns, and more rules will only affect lawful gun owners. And I don't have a gun, as a disclaimer. I also don't have a gun.
I also don't have a gun.
As a disclaimer, I know this could be a very hot topic, but I do agree with Preeti in that I do think that in the USA we are far too gone for de-armament, and rather there perhaps needs to be like things put into place in regards to this. I really like this whole psychological test. But what I wanted to say, just to bring it back to the CHIT aspect of the chat, is, let's see here. Preeti made this comment, which I really loved earlier, about rehabilitation, right? So we only bring it up when someone becomes criminal. Imagine if we got to them sooner. And I really, really love this, because like right now we've gone off into like, okay, gun control and this, and maybe we need guns, and maybe there's going to be a coup d'etat, and like all this stuff. I do want to
say that we went off in that direction. I think I brought it up, and I think it was a fair point. I'm like, if I'm walking around all these crazy people who don't see the need for rehabilitation, then I'm going to increasingly feel the need to like protect myself. Whether it's from governments, but even other desperate humans.
And to amplify your point in regards to what I was trying to say about Latin America, is
Yeah.
that it's like common knowledge that governments are corrupt.
Right.
They're going to try and steal our money and hurt us. And that's like history. And so a lot of people do have, you know, guns, or like they're trying to protect themselves, which makes total sense to me. If I'm living under a government that's going to like try to hurt me, or like try to like whatever, I want to have something to protect myself. However, the point that we always want to keep on coming back to is that rehabilitation of the soul. And I love how Preeti put it. It's like, imagine if we would have gotten to them sooner. Imagine if we would have like sat with the person, if there would have been therapy for the person, or a spiritual community for the person, or a bhakti, you know, community for the person, whatever it might be that that person might need, then that person might have turned away from the dark and turned towards the light, turned towards Krishna, and we wouldn't be having these kinds of conversations. But I think it's so difficult, you know, and this is where we kind of come to an impasse, because it's so difficult to do something like that for people when society as a whole is not taking accountability for taking part in the proliferation of violence, gore, pornography, all of this stuff. So like Preeti is saying, it's like, where, you know, when it's not criminal, we're just like, oh, whatever, you know, thin veil of civility. Yeah, go watch the movie, whatever. But we're not taking accountability as a society, saying these things are going to affect us. These things are going to lead to more criminal things happening. These things are going to lead to depression, anxiety,
and I wonder
stuff.
about that too. Why? Like, I get a sense of, I'm putting myself in like a early 20th century, maybe 19th century religious world, and someone comes out with a story where you like chop someone's head off, and you like show that on stage, or you show that in the movie. And I feel like culturally that would have been so taboo, and it would have just been cut in its tracks. Like, nope. And or suppose you were actually able to like manage to get that movie out, but no one would go and see it because it was just too much against like the social or moral standard of the time. And so just to your point, I'm amplifying your point that if we as individuals aren't going to take responsibility for and hold ourselves accountable to proper standards, because there is no proper standard aside from whatever I think, then we can't really cry about the effects that come from these sorts of things. It's hypocrisy to do so. It's hypocrisy to do so. You can't, just like there was this Cuties movie that came out on the Netflix a few months ago. Didn't see it, but and the movie was supposed to bring light to how they sexualize children while sexualizing the children that they use in the movie. You know, and showing like crotch shots and of 11-year-old girls. So there was a huge protest, and I think cancel Netflix was like trending on social media. So they got like a huge backlash for it. But then whatever, social media world. I really wonder how many of those people canceled their Netflix and then went back to them like 2 weeks later because they got bored. And just, I'm not judging anyone who's doing that, but I wanted to amplify your point that if we're not going to hold ourselves accountable to the standards that we cry about when someone breaks them, then you don't have a right to cry about that. You can't have your cake and eat it too, so to speak. So that's what you said. We're in an impasse. We're actually stuck because we're addicted to the culture of sense gratification whilst crying about the results of the culture of sense gratification.
Yes, that was perfect. Exactly. We're addicted to the culture of sense gratification while
crying about the results of the
while crying about the results of sense gratification. Apparently there's like this very polemical music video that just came out. Maybe we can talk about this next time, but I just thought of it. There's this rapper and his name is Lil Nas X. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Maybe.
He's a gay rapper, and like he started off as like country rapper thing and like whatever. And he came out with this recent video where it was a lot. You know, I was hearing about all the polemics, I was seeing the memes, and then I was just like, you know what? Like, actually, we watched it. We were like, let's see what all the fuss is about. Long story short, lots of like weird imagery, and basically it ends with him having like sex with the devil. and like rolling down this stripper pole from like heaven to hell or something like that, right? And the reason I'm bringing this, and then he made a limited release 666 Satan shoes by Nike, whatever, right? So when I saw the video, I was just like, yeah, whatever, you know, like I told my partner, I was like, whatever, you know, Carmi's like, it is what it is, you know, like, cool. But what I really didn't like was, you know, Lil Nas was getting a lot of heat about this. And he said in one of his tweets, you know, me sliding down a stripper pole from like heaven to hell is not the problem with America. You know, the government not doing anything about mass shootings is what's the problem. And I think that that's like a perfect example of us wanting and being addicted to the culture of sense gratification, but not taking accountability for the consequences of it.
Right.
So not understanding that there's a direct correlation between the image that you've now posted of that millions and millions of people, not only Americans across the world, are going to see,
especially young people who haven't
especially young people,
their moral compass and all of that.
You're perpetuating this culture of I do what I want. No one can tell me what to do. I'm playing with the moral standards. I live by my own values. I'm savage. And now all of a sudden you're having sex with the devil and millions of people are seeing it. It was like actually Satan. Like, and it's like, you know, not being able to see the correlation between that and how that can make people's minds sick. You know, it can make people's minds like, it can make people's minds veer towards seeing those kinds of things as okay, gore, violence, sex addiction, et cetera, et cetera. And then when the consequences happen, which is mass shootings or killings or whatever, I wipe my hands clean. I wash my hands. I have nothing to do with that, you know?
Right.
And so it's such a huge disconnect of our own participation in that, whether we are creating the content or whether we're consuming the content. We also have an accountability in that, you know, whether we're sharing the content.
Right. If you're a consumer, you're as much responsible in that sense. Just like, you know how we have this statement that he who kills the animal, he who ships it, he who, not Little Nas X, I love Old Town.
I'll tell you, Preeti, you know, the song was good. The song that the video, I was like, oh, this song was good. But the video concept, I was just like, why did we need to go this direction of just like heaven and hell and devil and sex? It was like very, very kind of like grotesque in a way. I would use that kind of word.
Yeah, there's a statement that he who kills the animal, he who ships it, he who sells it, he who buys it, and he who cooks it, and he who eats it. All 6 persons are culpable in the sin of killing an animal, or a cow specifically, I think it comes. So yeah, we don't feel that we're responsible for how we consume. You know, all these evil things are going on for creating the objects that we like to consume, and we normally just like to turn a blind eye to that part. And then the consuming part goes on. And then when this comes to light, like all the evil that goes into the sins, we're like, well, those corporations are bad. But it's like they're doing all of this because of you. If we wouldn't buy their products, you know, then we wouldn't be able to, then they wouldn't care to perform those types of activities. So then, so then we're responsible. Or, you know, we may be a little bit removed from the messiness of the process, but we're still responsible as consumers. And that's the part that we don't want to look at. First of all, that's the part that we actually control, because the other stuff is completely out of our hands. Like, we're not in control of Little Nas and what sort of content he wants to make, but we are in control of what we see. And I think that's the other thing, which is interesting, because you saw that video. I'm like tempted now to go see it myself, frankly speaking. So the danger of hearing about these things also. But there's again, coming back to that point of the fascination with the weird and the order, that even if you see something like that and you criticize it, in a sense, we've already been caught by it. You know, because we've just become like another consumer of this thing, even for the purpose of criticism. And so, yeah, that's the part that's just so hard to look at, honestly. The part that we actually have power over, namely the power of consumption. And I definitely, I want to dedicate at least a year to like, I need to really improve how I consume. Otherwise, yeah, I'm starting to get in that space where I'm like, I don't even know if I'm spiritual anymore unless I consume in a more appropriate way. I still think I'm spiritual, but I'm starting to get in that.
You're spiritual.
You're spiritual. That space where I'm becoming the question: how can? Yeah, this is another conversation. Just like we had this conversation a little bit with Brindavan, which we had her on as a guest. I'm really starting to feel like, how is whatever I share on any platform more than empty platitudes if I don't really start, leveling up or getting my shit together? That's our tagline. And areas like how I consume, like what media am I consuming? What sort of stuff am I watching? And I'm like every human, I'm definitely one to give myself a pass when I'm, it's just a little decompress. It's just a little bit of this, a bit of that. But then it's just like, okay, fine. But I'm not the type of person that's going to make the world a better place. And I just have to come to terms with that. I can't, if I'm going to be that sort of person that allows myself to cross a line whenever I feel a little discomfort inside, I need a little distraction or I need a little, that's fine, be you or whatever. But then I'm not the type of person that's going to usher in a better world. I'm not that type of person. And then since I'm not the type of person that I don't really have the right to cry about why the world isn't better. And I think for me, this is definitely a personal meditation. It's been on my heart more and more these days. As a result, I've been increasing my jop a little bit, intensifying a little bit this last week. But that's also kind of what I hear when I hear people cry about like gun shootings and all that. I'm just like, anyway, you also watching a Little Nas video and liking it and buying his CD and you buy this and you buy that. So you don't really have a right to complain that the world is in a better place because you're not the type of person that's going to make it a better place. That's the part that we don't want to look at.
Yeah. And I think that really coming to that understanding is very humbling. Really coming to the understanding that like, oh crap, I'm in this condition where like any little irritation, I'm just going to go decompress, And I think that what tends to happen in the criticism or the polemics of politics or shootings or gun control or whatever is that, I think I can say this, that like the populace is not having that humbling moment, no, we're right. We are right. This is how it should be. This is how the society should be. It should be whatever, like this. Both sides, right? Both sides. And I just wanted to bring up a point that Madhavapuri made a while ago. He said, get a person in good association, one of the most potent forms of rehabilitation. Right. And I really love this point because in our tradition, in our bhakti tradition, one of the most important factors is to have the association of sadhus. And, it's like to be in association with those people who aren't going to cross the line anytime they have a minor irritation, to have the association of those saints, of those lights in our life that really are walking that path. I might know that I myself maybe in this life will not, but at least I can follow in their footsteps. At least I can be in, their shade, right, of this like blazing fire of the material world. And the thing is that, this is a whole nother topic and maybe we can talk about this next time, but this idea of taking shelter, the idea of a guru, the idea of this, people don't want that, people really scoff at that kind of idea. No, I know who I am. I know what I want. I know what I'm going to do. Boom. That's it. And so this idea of understanding like where I'm at in my spiritual life, in my own humanity, that I'm not advanced in it, essentially. So then let me seek the association of saintly people, of sadhus. Let me be in their shelter. And let me honestly try and do that because, if not, then I'm going to be watching Lil Nas X videos and doing whatever I'm going to be doing. Yeah, like this. And I think we've gone into so many different topics. I kind of love it because the conversation has unfolded in such a beautiful way. But I think that one of the key points of our topic, or at least that I've seen come up, is this need for rehabilitation of the soul, and not having the proper not having the proper tools to do it, not having the humility to take shelter of someone and to say, I don't know. Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita has to tell Krishna, I don't know what's good for me anymore. I need you to tell me what is the highest good for me. Maybe it's that or whatever it might be. But this need for rehabilitation that we need not only as individuals, but as a society. And first accepting that, and like once I can accept that and really understand that, then I can say, oh, okay, how do we do that? How do we rehabilitate? Maybe it's not the whole society, but how do I rehabilitate first and foremost myself, right? Get my shit together. So maybe that might be taking, shelter of a guru, sadhu, finding a spiritual community, etc. And once I feel like I'm on like this rehabilitating path, okay, now let's rehabilitate together, like my community, my society, like this. But I think if that point is not reached, then I'm also the same with you. Like, then every gun shooting and this, I'm kind of just like, like Kavi posted this really wonderful thing. I saw a great meme, maybe one of you posted it, but it was a guy outside a gun shop that had guns everywhere on sale. And next to it was a building saying mental health, and it had a giant, huge staircase up to the therapist to the top. So mental health issues need to be addressed, of course. And I think mental health issues, emotional issues are very much spiritual issues, they're very much issues of the soul. So they need to be addressed. So that's why it's like, if we're not addressing those issues, then, I use this word a lot because I love this word. If we're not addressing those issues, then all of the racism, gun shooting, gun control, it's all fanfare. It's all just, it's all just this kind of stuff, just kind of taking up space in the social media news world. And we're not diving deep.
Language is so much verbiage.
Yes, verbiage.
So much verbiage, empty verbiage. So with all of that said, I think I might invest in looking for a gun.
Or a therapist?
My mental health is tight, yo.
Ooh, yes. Yes, celebrate. Celebrate your wins.
Yeah, I'll look into the mental health thing also, but in the meantime, I'm gonna put energy into this gun because I feel psychologically all right for the time being. I'm not really advocating for gun control, but I do get it, and won't be surprised if you see me with one in the future.
If Mad Max society starts to set in, I will probably also go get one because I don't want to be turned into a Mad Max slave person. Like, no, thank you. But I also do think that rehabilitation doesn't need to look like, because some people are very taboo against.
Yes, I'm sorry for bringing it there.
Endpoint, protect yourself from the gun wielding crazies. I love that. I think sometimes people have a taboo against therapy, but in our community, in our society, in our Krishna consciousness society, so much emphasis is put on devotee care, and even more people are saying there should be even more emphasis put on devotee care, just like trying to be there for that person, and that's why I really love that that's a big factor in our society, whether or not we, are upholding it or not, but it is a big thing that, is really beautiful. So I see that as a form of therapy, one devotee really caring for another devotee, listening confidentially, what are they having to say, and sharing with them, and like this is very, very important, And anyway, we could literally talk forever. That's what I love about Chit Chat. Like, we could just like go off into like all.
Thank you for those who've been hanging out with us for the whole hour and 40 minutes now. It's our longest episode.
Yes. Hopefully. Yes. Thank you all so much. And thank you all for getting involved. We love it when you comment, Kavi and Preeti and Madhavapuri and Sarigrahi and Jagadish Hari Prabhu. So thank you all so much. And we'll be here. Thank you, Sarigrahi Art. Thank you. And we'll see you all next week, Monday at 5 p.m. And we'll talk about something else then. Yes. Thank you so much, Jai Jagannath. Hari Hari Bol.